Hello, everybody. I'm Depriesticles, and over this past week or so, I feel like I've really just had this hankering to play with my Wong, but I didn't quite know what I was doing. So after a little bit of research and some playing around with it, I feel like I finally got it up and running, and it's finally at a spot to where I feel like I'm comfortable showing you guys. And by that, of course, I mean my Wong deck in Marvel Snap. This deck actually is pretty resilient. It has some curves to it, some twists and turns that you probably wouldn't expect to see in a classic Wong deck. But it's all there for its purpose, and I would like to show you guys why. So let's get into it. The deck in its entirety features Armor, Magic, Cosmo, Shuri, Wong, Symbiote Spider-Man, White Tiger, Black Panther, Red Skull, Arnim Zola, Taskmaster, and Odin. It doesn't function exactly the same as the other Wong decks that I've seen out there in the wild, and I think that's where its strength comes into play. Though we do see some familiar faces in here, there are a couple of curveballs that throw people off their game and get more cubes in your pocket. The overall goal with this deck is to get a pair of really big cards out there that will outpower our opponents and then protect those cards from getting destroyed or disrupted. Let's go through why each of these cards is important for the deck. Starting with the amplification package, we have Shuri, Wong, and Symbiote Spider-Man. These three cards serve as the foundation that we are going to build our big cards on top of. Each one of them has a unique way of making the cards played after it bigger in some way and helps us get to our end goal. Shuri doubles the power of the next card played at that location. Wong will grant you double on reveal triggers, which can be followed up by Shuri for a double amplification. And Symbiote Spider-Man will merge with the lowest costing card at that location and repeat its on reveal effect. This new card has provided a major upgrade for this archetype and allows for some crazy interactions, such as like double Shuri activations resulting in ridiculously massive cards without having to rely on Wong or any extra clutter in the lane. And those massive cards in question are none other than Black Panther and Red Skull. Each one of these cards provides a mean to an end for this card-slinging monster, but the Panther really is the shining star of the deck. Being played after any one of the foundation pieces will turn this thing into a formidable beast, and it alone has been enough to force many of my opponents to retreat in fear of getting stomped on by the world's largest cat dad. Red Skull is here to serve as a backup plan, but shouldn't be taken lightly on its own either. A Spider-Man into Shuri, followed up with a Red Skull, will also put this thing at the top of the food chain, and the ongoing effect won't matter one bit. This may seem like an odd add to some, but I promise you this card has won me many, many games, and it's always nice not to have to rely on getting one specific card out of your deck to try to win. And speaking of winning, just having one large critter on one lane is not enough to win us the game, obviously. So what do we do to wrap things up? We have our heavy hitters of Arnim Zola, Taskmaster, and Odin. Using the Zola on our Black Panther, for example, will give us copies at the other two locations, and its reveal ability happens again, effectively quadrupling its power. If you pair that with Wong, then you can get the double proc, and the copies could get the double triggers yet another time, putting these things into the hundreds or even thousands depending on RNG and location abilities. Then after that, you can play Odin over the Zola, triggering the Zola once again, and putting a fresh Odin at each one of those other locations where a Wong copy already exists, and getting another 4 activations of the Kitty Man, and giving the world's largest biceps known to man or feline. And if none of that works out, you could always just Taskmaster after you get the really big Black Panther or a Red Skull for a win. And if all else fails, and you can't seem to find those cards, you'll always have the contingency plan of White Tiger to add on top of the Wong or under the Spider-Man to give us those extra 8 power cards on the other lanes that you might be missing. This thing has so many different ways of being able to pull off a win that even when you are disrupted, you can still often find yourself a way out. Once you've gotten your big play out there and there are a couple of really big creatures on the field that will seemingly win the game, it's time to lock it down and make sure that we can protect our investment. There have been far too many times where a Shang-Chi will shut me down and I lose the game simply because I have no way of protecting myself. This is where both Armor and Cosmo have come into play. Before these cards, I was playing around with Mystique and Madam Web in these spots, and while I was able to pull off some really unique plays, I still had the issue of being susceptible to destruction on turn 7, and Shang-Chi is too commonly used to not have to worry about it. Armor can be played as a setup piece early in the game, but Cosmo should almost never be played before turn 7. More than just a couple of times while testing this out, I was trying to use Cosmo as an early setup piece, only to have it turn off my Black Panther that was just Zola'd later on in the game. But also, one of these cards alone in the deck seems pretty pointless, so if you were to take one out, I'd probably pull the other one out as well. but this at least provides us a couple of flex positions in the deck if you're feeling comfortable enough to not run the protection package. As far as weaknesses go, we still have to be cautious about the classic Heck Your Wong style cards such as Cosmo, Enchantress, and Rogue. But even when those happen, there are still a couple of fallback plans that we have, so it isn't necessarily as much of a detriment as it could be in other Wong-style decks. There's also Clog that can shut us down pretty quickly too. This one's a lot more difficult to deal with, but it's not as commonly played in archetypes, so there could be much worse things that we have to concede to on a regular basis. And even then, if you have like Shuri, Red Skull, Taskmaster combo for turns 4, 5, and 6, then even the Clog decks can't do a whole lot because they don't run a whole lot of big, powerful creatures. And finally, and what is considered to be probably the biggest weakness in my experience, is that you rarely have priority before turn like 5, 6. And because your foundation pieces are so extremely telegraphed by turns like 4, 5, your opponent has the opportunity to counter those things with disruption cards. All these things considered, though, I still feel like this is one of the most resilient decks that I've ever put together, and has quickly become one of my favorite decks to play. At the time of this recording, according to my SnapFan metrics, I'm looking at a 56% win rate after its first 50 games in its current form. If I was playing more aggressively, then both the net and average cubes here could be much higher, but for metric purposes, I was just going for the highest win rate as possible, so I wasn't snapping. What I found, though, is that once you did snap on turn like 4 and nothing else was on the board and followed that up with a Black Panther, opponents would either leave immediately, resulting in a 1 cube gain, or they themselves would snap and telegraph to God and everybody that they have an answer to your board state, in which case I would generally just choose to back out myself if I didn't have priority. With that information in hand, you can definitely play more aggressive than I have been and snap when you have one of the combos in hand to find yourself with a huge gain in cubes. Give this deck and other future decks a gauge to measure up against. I'll be putting these on a 5-star rating system across 5 different categories. The categories are going to be Power, which measures how big of cards the deck can populate or how big it can make them. Setup, which will tell you how easily it is to set up the win condition for the deck. Resilience, which will show how well the deck is protecting itself. Win rate and cube gain rate are the 5 categories. And for this deck, I'm going to give it a whole 5 stars in Power. There are not many other decks that I've seen that can produce the type of power that, on the board that this thing can produce. I've had this thing hit over 2 million power on a lane before, which is absolutely wild. So the power, definitely 5 stars. Definitely 5 stars. It's earned 4 stars in setup. Since there are like 3 different foundation pieces that we can combo off it with in different ways, we find that it's pretty consistent. You know, we find consistency there in our setup. So we're gonna give that a good 4. A 3 in resilience, since we struggle kind of having priority and we're susceptible to disruption. But there are some good ways around that. So we're gonna give that just kind of an average rating of 3 on the resilience scale. And then we'll give it another 5 in the win rate, because anytime you are consistently winning more than half your games, you are doing amazingly. And finally, a 3 in cube gain rate, because of how quickly people will back out if they don't have answers to your big creatures. Giving this deck an overall score of 4 out of 5 stars, and that's pretty heckin' good if I do say so myself. And that's the deck in its entirety. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find me live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Depriesticles, where I would love to talk deck tech with you guys. Thanks for your time, everybody. Have a great day, and happy snapping.